Alright, this is Unit 6, Nigeria, the review guide. A quick overview of the key concepts that will be on the test. For political party system between Mexico, Nigeria, and Russia, what do they have in common? A lot of them fall into the corruption. There's some election irregularities which have improved over time. They also both have a bicameral house where the upper house is divided by region and the lower house is single-member district for the people. They also have a federalist structure and a president is voted in. The major motivation for neoliberal reforms in Mexico and Nigeria, outside influences like the World Bank, international lenders, are telling them to change their policies in order to pay back some of their debts. Nigeria's multi-state structure was primarily designed to splinter the power of ethnic groups so that no one ethnic group could gain power. However, that has created much conflict. What has been the most persistent political challenge facing Nigeria since independence? We've talked about the corruption in the ethnic groups and the diversity of the country, as well as the constant military takeover. Britain and Nigeria have in common, they do have strong multinationalism structure after colonialism. Authoritarian regimes usually lack a well-established rule of law where they don't follow their constitution. Nigeria and Iran both have a judicial system that includes Sharia law in the north for Nigeria. In political life in the Fourth Republic, which is the republic they are in now after the 1999 Constitution, there is a threat of military coup, however, that has dwindled. There's constant corruption and bribes, some regional favoritism, and the president still has a lot of power. Remember, a regime change is a replacement of the political institution, so from a democracy to a totalitarian government, not from one general to the next. Women in Nigeria are more educated in the South due to the Great Britain and their influence and the better education as well as schools. Also in the North, they are following a strict Islamic tradition. Military in Mexico and Nigeria. Mexico really stays out of politics, their army does. However, in Nigeria, there's coup d'etats almost every day where generals were taking control and they were the military, not the military in barracks, but military in government. Political structure set up by Britain and how it's been significant for Nigeria. It aggravated those ethno-national boundaries, so it split up ethnicities, and kind of created that tension. Nigerian public policy is influenced by both domestic and international factors. Some of those factors include the World Bank, the bureaucracy, which is bloated and inefficient, all those divisions in ethnic and religious backgrounds, as well as the international commodities that rely on those imports to keep their country going. The dependency theory is that developing countries dependent on a well-developed country. It's foreign control, basically. Developing nations are hampered by the debt that they have, and they owe it to those developed countries. Nigeria is part of the ECOWAS, that African organization that has some military power behind it as well as some economic influence, and they're one of the most powerful because they are one of the largest economies and the largest countries in Africa. One reason that a parliamentary style government failed, if you think about all the ethnic ties, ethnic backgrounds, the different people trying to compete for power, no one party, because a lot of their parties are based on ethnicity, could gain power. If they cannot gain a majority or power in parliament, then you cannot vote in a prime minister. The most important reason that Nigeria eventually settled on a federalist, not a unitary political system, was to kind of fight those ethnic tensions. Between 66 and 99, all Nigerian presidents except for one gained power through a coup or military dictatorship. In Russia and Chechnya and Nigeria's Biafran civil war, the conflicts were based on ethnic differences. That was the Igbo for Nigeria. Prebendalism is Nigeria's patron-client system. After the election of 2011, protests erupted in the North based on the belief that Goodluck Jonathan shouldn't be president because it violated the informal North to South rule that a president should be from the North and the next one from the South. Also, there was some elections that were rigged. The following countries have a federal structure. You need to know that Russia, Mexico, and Nigeria do. Some of the devolution that has occurred from the central government of Nigeria to local governments in order to lessen some of the tensions is that they have created Sharia law courts in the north to allow them to practice that way. The party system in Nigeria and Mexico. Mexico was a one-party rule, the PRI, for a long time. In Nigeria, they don't really have one dominant party or a coherent party system. They're somewhat based on ethnic ties. Now the two biggest ones are trying to gather some votes from all over the country. The special requirement for the presidential elections in Nigeria is that in 2/3 of the states, a winner must get at least 25%. The parastatals in Nigeria are corporations that are owned by Nigeria themselves, the state. They provide some commercial or social welfare services. The national question, we didn't really talk about this, it is in your readings. The national question dilemma is whether or not Nigeria should stay together as a nation. And that can be difficult to separate because the North wouldn't have the resources to survive. However, and the South then wouldn't have the territory, maybe the military power. So should they stay together? Should they split up based on religious boundaries or ethnic boundaries? 28 here, explain the impact colonialism had on both Great Britain and Nigeria. In Nigeria, they have that national identity formation. So the colonial rule in the South creates a regional identity. It also spreads Christianity and has better schools because of the British. Then in the North, they're predominantly Muslim. They stayed with their traditional rulings until they had gained independence. There are also many language boundaries as well. In their ineffective civil society, weak democratic consolidation created an authoritarian structure, and they became dependent on the West. In Britain, they do become a multinational, multi-ethnic society. Immigrants come from the colonies that they were ruling. However, a rise in nationalism occurs. They're very anti-immigrant. A lot of immigrants then begin to hold office. They have self-determination in colonies, influences groups to seek different autonomy and international influence sustained from exploitation of natural resources and trade agreements. So they had trade agreements, they relied on those natural resources, now they have to find a different way. Last thing here, describe some specific violent events that have occurred in Great Britain and Nigeria over politics. In Nigeria, on the below here, we have kidnappings of engineers and oil workers, violence at the elections and the polls, a lot of protests in the big cities. They're blowing up oil pipelines and lighting oil fields on fire. And then two examples, the 2005 terrorist London bombings. There's also a 2007 Scottish airport bombing that was in response to some political things as well as terrorist organizations. That is your quick overview. Again, 25 question, multiple choice, 2 short response for your last test in comparative gov.